Let's jump right in. In this explainer, we're putting on our clinical child psychologist hats to diagnose exactly how AI-driven social media is literally rewiring developing brains. We aren't just talking about basic screen time today. We're looking at a highly engineered environment. We're going to explore the intersection of neuroscience, corporate profit models, and behavioral psychology to understand what is actually happening inside the minds of the next generation.
So let's start with a really fundamental question. Is the mere presence of a phone rewiring our children's brains? To answer that, we have to treat this like a real clinical assessment. Let's look at the symptoms first, starting with the startling reality of our modern digital habits. Because honestly, the numbers we're seeing right now, they're completely unprecedented in human history.
Take a look at this. Recent data shows individuals are picking up their phones between 150 and 200 times every single day. And, this isn't about sitting down to read a long, thoughtful article. It's this habitual, almost constant need to just check in. It's a deeply ingrained behavioral loop, kind of like a localized reflex, where the brain is just constantly hunting for a microdose of stimulation.
And those 150 to 200 pickups, well, they culminate in an average of 5.5 hours of daily screen time across the board. But here's what's truly alarming from a developmental perspective. Some adolescents are hitting staggering highs of over 17 hours a day during summer breaks. 17 hours. I mean, think about that for a second. That leaves barely enough time for basic sleep, let alone the physical and social activities that are absolutely essential for a developing brain.
Now, here's the kicker. The damage isn't just happening when the screen is actually glowing. We're seeing a highly concerning symptom known as the brain drain phenomenon. Research from the University of Texas shows that just having a smartphone within reach, even if it's turned completely off and face down on a desk, significantly reduces your available cognitive capacity. Why? Because your brain is actively, subconsciously burning up its limited cognitive resources just trying not to pick it up.
Section 1. AI algorithms and the profit pathogen.
We've seen the symptoms, right? Now let's look at the environmental pathogen causing them, corporate economic models. And the scale of this is just massive. In 2022 alone, U.S. children and adolescents generated $11 billion in advertising revenue from major social media platforms. $11 billion. This points to a profound ethical and economic reality. These platforms are fully committed to maximizing profits, and the commodity they're essentially selling to advertisers? It's the undivided attention of young, extremely malleable minds.
To maximize those profits, these tech companies aren't just relying on catchy content. They're deploying incredibly advanced machine learning. These algorithms use complex tools, things like natural language processing, continuous feed optimization, and real-time predictive behavior analysis, to constantly interpret sentiments and interests. They are continuously tweaking endless feeds to make sure users stay hooked for as long as theoretically possible. It's basically a highly sophisticated trap designed by some of the smartest engineers on the planet.
And this, brilliantly, if darkly, illustrates the ethical crisis we're facing. As one expert starkly put it in Newsweek, if social media is the digital heroin of our youth, AI is the fentanyl. There is absolutely no informed consent happening here. Teenagers' data is harvested without them truly understanding it, all to optimize these deeply addictive, highly personalized reward loops that they literally do not have the neurological maturity to resist.
That brings us to Section 2, the pathology, rewiring the developing brain. So, from a neurobiological perspective, what's actually happening inside an adolescent's head when they get trapped in this algorithmic loop? Well, it leads directly to what neuroscientists call dopamine exhaustion. See, the brain's dopamine factory is a region called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA. Normally, dopamine is released when we put in effort to achieve a goal. But endless scrolling? It's exactly like revving a manual car in neutral. It floods the brain with cheap dopamine without any effort-based replenishment. Eventually, the factory just empties out, leading to reduced motivation, chronic distraction, and deep emotional irritability. It's essentially a state of neurological starvation. Alarmingly, this excessive screen time strongly correlates with physical, structural changes in the brain. We're actually seeing shrinking gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. That's the brain's logic and planning center. We're seeing it in the amygdala, which handles emotional regulation. And we're seeing structural dysregulation in the basal ganglia, which processes rewards. We are literally watching the physical architecture of adolescent brains alter in real time in response to these algorithms.
Okay, Section 3. The Tetris Effect, an intriguing intervention.
But listen, there is hope here.
We aren't just diagnosing the problem, we want to figure out how to actually get rid of this addiction. Let's shift to a fascinating neurological phenomenon that can serve as the foundation of our clinical treatment plan. Have you ever played a video game for so long that you literally see it when you close your eyes? That's called the Tetris effect. It happens when prolonged focus on a visual task, like playing Tetris, actually repatterns our visuospatial working memory. The brain's neuroplasticity adapts to those shapes and patterns, causing us to see the images even after we stop playing. The brain actively constructs these representations, and it completely occupies our mental processes.
So, how do we use this little quirk of the brain to our advantage? Well, a really fascinating clinical study proved that just 3 minutes, literally just 3 minutes, of playing Tetris significantly reduced cravings for substances and food, dropping them from a 70% baseline all the way down to 50%.
How on earth does a puzzle game stop an addiction craving? It happens through a technique called visual cognitive interference. It works because the puzzle competes for the exact same cognitive resources, your visuospatial working memory, that you need to vividly imagine and sustain a craving. You physically cannot hold the image of scrolling through a digital feed in your mind if your brain is super busy rotating visual puzzle pieces. It completely disrupts the consolidation of the craving. It's a real game changer.
Moving to Section 4, the treatment plan. Cognitive interference versus blockers.
This brings us to how we actually apply this in the real world to combat screen addiction. Right now, most parents rely on passive management, things like app blockers and screen time limits. And sure, those are helpful infrastructural boundaries, but they pale in comparison to active cognitive interference. When a teenager consciously interrupts a digital urge and forces their brain to focus on a spatial puzzle instead, they're actively engaging the brain's anterior mid-cingulate cortex, or AMCC. The AMCC is basically the actual willpower center of the brain. Every single time you deny a craving and pivot to a complex task, that AMCC grows stronger, just like a muscle. Passive blockers don't build willpower, active interference absolutely does.
A prescription for parents and educators.
As concerned parents, educators, and clinicians, our takeaway from all this data has to be rooted in actionable, evidence-based steps. We have to protect our children's neurobiology from an environment that's entirely engineered to exploit it. So here is the 3-step prescription. First, remember that University of Texas study? Create physical distance. Remove the phone entirely from the room to stop the subconscious cognitive brain drain. Second, when the urge hits, use visual cognitive interference, like Tetris, physical puzzles, or even drawing to kill the digital craving and build up that AMC willpower muscle. And finally, and probably most importantly, actively replace the cheap, isolated dopamine of a screen with the deep, fulfilling oxytocin of true, undivided human connection.
This leaves us with one final urgent question to reflect on. We know the corporate models, we know the algorithms, and we now understand the neurobiology. So, are we ready to help our kids rebuild their cognitive willpower and reclaim their developing brains from the feed? Thank you for joining me on this explainer. Start creating that physical distance today, and I'll see you next time.